The last topic I want to hit with you today, I called it kind of civil war and lynching. And these are actually very, very serious topics. I do not wish to discuss them in a cavalier way. I'm going to start with the lynching thing, though. President Trump put out a tweet in which he described the Democrats' conduct toward him as a lynching. His tweet actually said, essentially, all Republicans must remember what they are witnessing here, a lynching. But we will win. So Trump described the way the Democrats are coming after him, trying to impeach him, as a lynching. So the left went crazy. They have so many members of the U.S. House took to the floor of the House to denounce the outrage. How could he use the word lynching? This is horrible. Well, folks, lynching is really was a serious and horrible. The lynching in the South was a serious and horrible thing. Lynching during slavery, pre-Civil War, post-Civil War, in the Jim Crow South, which was run by the Democrats. In the South, where you had the Democrats' KKK organization engaged in lynchings. Yes, there were lynchings of Black Americans, a horrible stain on the Democrat Party's history, on the history of the South and the Democrats who ran the South at that time. However, the word lynching does not just mean the lynchings that occurred in the South. It was a word that pre-existed those incidents. In fact, it was a word that means essentially the taking into your own hands the means of justice. It means someone acting as a jury, judge, arbiter, and sentencer, and the executioner. So essentially, they were people who were killed and hung or otherwise died horrible deaths, but people attacked by an entity or a group of people with no jury, no due process, no rights to cross-examine witnesses, no right to understand the charges against you, no due process. That's what lynching is. So the idea of using that term by President Trump is not an inaccurate use of the word lynching. In fact, it's so not inaccurate that I want to play for you how Joe Biden, the top contender in the Democrat race for the nomination to run for president in 2020, how Joe Biden used that word when he was talking about the attack on the effort to impeach President Clinton. So this is Matt the Wonderful. Has my next clip.
History is going to question whether or not this was just a partisan lynching. It seems to me that the process is being demeaned. And I have great faith in Henry Hyde, but old Henry better get on the job. Because unless he figures out how to corral this, no matter what happens, even if the president should be impeached, history is going to question whether or not this was just a partisan lynching or whether or not it was something that, in fact, met the standard, the very high bar that was set by the founders as to what constituted an impeachable offense.
Okay, folks, so back in the days when the House did impeach President Clinton, and as you know, the Senate did not remove him, but that was Joe Biden, as a senator at that time, calling the impeachment of President Clinton a lynching. Other Democrats who are now allegedly, just worked up into a tizzy over President Trump's use of that term, just want to share with you other prominent Democrats having used that word very, very recently. In fact, the New York Times ran a headline, "Fury as Trump compares impeachment inquiry to lynching." And so they're just denouncing, they're just, clutching their pearls and hand-wringing, and they're outraged because President Trump used that word. Let's look at how else that word has been used. For example, Democrat Representative Jim McDermott in 1998. "We're taking a step down the road to becoming a political lynch mob." That would be Democrat Representative Jim McDermott. "We are going to find a rope, find a tree, and ask a bunch of questions later." Kind of like what the Democrats are doing to Trump. Find out the facts later, decide ahead of time, we're going to impeach him somehow, we're just going to find some basis to do it. At the same time, and again, back to the era of the impeachment of President Clinton, you have Democrat Representative Jerry Nadler, still very active in the U.S. House. Jerry Nadler, "I wish we could get this over with quickly. In pushing the process and pushing the arguments of fairness and due process, the Republicans so far have been running a lynch mob." So Jerry Nadler, part of the current lynch mob, who is offended by the use of the term lynch mob, used the term himself when he was complaining about the Republicans who actually did follow correct protocol in pursuing the impeachment of President Clinton. But Nadler can say that term, but heaven forbid Trump say it. One more, Harry Reid, no, two more. One more, Harry Reid, at that time the Democrat senator, said on the Senate floor, the lynch mob, though, Mr. President, now has a new leader. So he's calling the members of the Congress who dared to try to impeach President Clinton, calling him a lynch mob. Harry Reid, last one, John Kerry. And he, in fact, this one writer put John Kerry, who served in Vietnam, because when Kerry was running, of course, he just endlessly reminded everyone he served in Vietnam, although he didn't really do anything over there. But John Kerry, it's a verbal political lynching on the floor of the Senate. Point being, when the Democrats use that term, they feel justified because they're describing what a real lynching is, or what they perceived the attack or the impeachment of President Clinton to be a lynching. And so they use that word and they use it accurately. So President Trump uses it, talking about how he's being treated by the Democrats, which is really far more of a lynch mob of him than anything the Republicans did to President Clinton, which I'll remind you again, the Republicans at the time they decided to pursue impeachment against President Clinton, they decided that they could use the term lynch mob, even though the Republicans were following the protocol, following the procedure that impeachment requires. So you have the Democrats not willing to hold a vote to impeach, holding secret hearings in the basement of the Capitol, not permitting other members of Congress to be there, no transparency, no public knowledge, no exposure of the complaint against the president, no willingness to have the witness against him come forward. One of the most primary elements of due process in existence is you get to confront the witnesses who are accusing you. The Democrats want to deprive the president of the right to even know who's accusing him, to face his accusers, to ask questions, to call witnesses, to engage in cross-examination. All of that's being deprived, the President Trump is being deprived of by the Democrats, which is, if anything, is an actual lynching in terms of the actual meaning of the word, meaning a failure to follow due process, but instead the accuser acting as accuser, judge, jury, and executioner. That would be what the Democrats are doing to President Trump. He's not, I mean, maybe you think, okay, that's an edgy word, maybe that offends people, shouldn't have used that word. It's not an inaccurate use of the word. And frankly, all the Democrats and the Democrat media mob getting hysterical over President Trump using that word were silent when all those characters we just read, in fact, people still involved today. Biden, who's running for president, used that word twice about the Republicans, used lynching in reference to President Clinton. Jerry Nadler, in the middle of this effort to take down the president any way he can, used that word. The double standard the Democrat media mob applies to Trump and the Republicans must be noticed, must be called out. And you know what? If you want to talk about the impeachment process or the charges that the Democrats are trying to bring, have a substantive discussion about what they have, what they don't have, what they're saying is impeachable, that is legitimate political conversation. Getting hysterical over the use of the word lynching is another way the Democrats are trying to avoid having the conversation about what's actually going on in Washington, avoid having to be accountable and responsible for the way they're conducting this inquiry, instead trying to divert America's attention to lather them up into concern and outrage and disgust over the use of a word they themselves have used. The other piece of this segment of the show today is that I want to talk about the lynching. I also want to talk about the idea there has been more and more discussion about a civil war, and I want to talk about that in a very serious and earnest way. To start with, there was a Major League Baseball umpire, a guy named Rob Drake, a Major League Baseball umpire who actually tweeted out, not as a baseball league umpire, but as an individual Twitter account, tweeted out this. I will be buying. So this is the Major League umpire Rob Drake. I will be buying an AR-15 tomorrow, because if you impeach my president this way, you will have another civil war. MAGA 2020. So the Major League Baseball people put out, hey, he's not really speaking for us. We don't really agree with the language he chose. He's obviously supports the president, but, we don't like his language too much. But he's picking up on language that's been used by both sides of the aisle. Both sides of the aisle have been using this expression about a civil war. I will tell you, even in 2018, I looked at this polling again, it's like June of 2018, I think. There was polling done by USA Today that said, are we headed for a civil war? And a third of the people polled said, yes, we are so divided in America that we're heading toward a civil war. In fact, I had a really very tender note from one of our listeners who emailed to say, I wish you would talk about this. Why is America so divided? People talk about civil war. What are they talking about? So I want to talk about this idea in a very rational, adult way, not the way that it sounds like conversation is happening around our country. To start with, in Texas, there is a Baptist church, actually here in Dallas, a Baptist church in which the pastor, Robert Jeffress, is a big supporter of President Trump and is a frequent visitor at the White House, advisor to Trump. Apparently, Jeffress said in some interview that he said something like a civil war might erupt in the United States. And now, by the way, Jeffress is a Fox News contributor and host who suggested that impeaching the president could lead to civil war. So Trump then tweeted, if the Democrats are successful in removing the president from office, which then Trump adds, which they never will be, it will cause a civil war like fracture in this nation from which our country will never heal. So Trump is quoting Jeffress about this idea that if the Democrats succeed in impeaching Trump, there may actually be civil war. I want to talk about that because I think that obviously, to state the obvious, there is a deep divide in this country. There are people who are determined to remove President Trump from office no matter what he has done. Even if he's done nothing impeachable, they just want him out. There are people who ardently support President Trump and are saying, don't you dare impeach him because he's done nothing impeachable. If everyone could be honest, I think most people know he's done nothing impeachable. I mean, he's done what Biden did in open camera. He's done. So there's not an impeachable offense yet, and I don't think there ever will be after all the investigation and scrutiny of the Trump presidency. But the division in America about this idea of civil war is a deeper question than just should Trump be removed. We have people who would argue, even on the conservative, the GOP side of the aisle, that, President Trump is just too divisive. He's just too confrontational. He's just too brazen. He just says things he shouldn't say. He's too unseemly. I mean, you can still be Republican, but think, Trump is just too much. He's too hard to take. People are kind of, he's just making things so difficult. And so the argument goes, and I got into it in Facebook with somebody on this very topic. Someone, definitely kind of a moderate rhino-y kind of person, but just basically saying, Trump, he just gets things too stirred up. If we can just get rid of him, and then we can go back to business as usual. And I want to warn you and just urge you to think about that is not true. The reasons the Democrats and some establishment Republicans want to impeach Trump is not because he is brazen. It is not because he is bold. It is not because he tweets a lot. It is not because he has a strong, bold, New York City billionaire bold personality. The Democrats want to impeach Trump because he has taken apart, he has exposed for the American public the establishment, ruling class, deep state mindset in Washington that simply says business will always be conducted as usual. We pretend to listen to the American people, but we don't. We have deep state actors in the DOJ, the FBI, the State Department, who really run this country, and we just fool around talking to the American people in various campaigns and various speeches, and we say we believe in things, but we just march along doing whatever we want to do. We ignore the will of the American people. And you have people who think, and so Trump comes along and he said, drain the swamp. He really meant pull back the stranglehold power over American free markets, over the American people that the regulatory state, the bureaucracy in Washington has assembled. President Trump really meant when he ran, really means today, he's going to lift regulation, free the American economy. He really meant he's going to put in place actual border security. That we're going to restore the idea of America having a border. We're going to restore the idea that citizenship means something, that having a legal immigration status means something, that the idea in America that you have to have some legal status to be here. You just can't be among the ones, the 11 million, 20 million, 30 million, I mean, some say 40 million, whatever the number is, of people just living in this country with no legal right to be here, and we have no legal recourse to make you go home. Trump was saying, we're going to reinstate sovereignty. We're going to reinstate and re-inspire the free markets. We're going to fight against socialism. We're going to bring back free markets and personal responsibility and individual worth and individual value and individual freedom. He ran on those ideas. These ideas and his willingness to implement them as president, using executive orders for the most part, because Congress, including the Republicans, will never back him, or not enough Republicans will back him. The Democrats see their entire ruling elite class threatened by what President Trump brought to Washington. They cannot believe he is succeeding in uprooting and exposing their deeply entrenched, deeply rooted power in Washington that never listens to the American people, that never tries to set the American people straight, that never tries to inform. They just can't believe that Trump is exposing this. And so their idea, understand, if they impeach Trump, which they're going to try to do, if they impeach Trump, it's not Trump personally, it is what he brought to Washington, this breath of fresh air, this renewal of the American people, the renewal of the spirit of America. And I'll tell you 3 things that are on the ballot in 2020. 3 pro-America ideas that are on the ballot in 2020. And they are the idea of freedom, sovereignty, and prosperity. Those 3 items, and you can put 100 more, but those 3 things are on the ballot in 2020. You have an American left that is bound and determined to crush individual freedom, that loves growing governmental control over society, that pushes governmental control over the healthcare system, the education system, the legal rights of the people. The idea of freedom itself is on the ballot in 2020. Trump is standing for American freedom. This makes the left crazy. When the American left has candidates running on the idea of fighting freedom, of taking away freedom of religion, forcing religions to abandon, this is Beto and others, forcing religions to choose between standing what they believe in or losing their 501c3 status, losing their tax-free status, forcing people, that we talk about the case in Minnesota where you have the Attorney General, Keith Ellison in Minnesota, prosecuting a Christian couple who own a video company because they're Christian and they don't actually want to do videos at marriages of same-sex couples. They're not fighting anyone's right to be a same-sex couple or to have a marriage or to have a video made. They just want to be free to pursue their religious freedom. And the American left, in the form of, in that case, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, saying, no, you can't do that. We can shut you down unless you salute the American left. So freedom is on the ballot in a countless of other ways. One other quick way I'll mention is the Constitution. The left is leaving the Constitution in shreds. They are willing to destroy the constitutional structure of government to take Trump down. So freedom is on the ballot in 2020. That's only a limited list of the reasons why I say freedom is on the ballot in 2020. So is sovereignty. Sovereignty of the very existence of America is on the ballot in 2020. If you don't enforce borders, if you don't agree there should be borders, if you agree that people who have no legal right to be here should be protected by the legal jurisdictions and eliminate ICE, eliminate the idea of enforcing our border laws, you don't agree that we should have sovereignty. You're agreeing anything goes. There's no such thing as America. There's no sovereignty. You're agreeing the very sovereignty of America doesn't matter to you. Another aspect of sovereignty being on the ballot in 2020 is the willingness of the American left to surrender more and more of the governance of America to the United Nations. I don't have time today to go into those, but freedom is on the ballot in 2020. Sovereignty is on the ballot in 2020. Those things matter. Last, just amazingly, it's right in your faces to see, is the very idea of American prosperity is on the ballot in 2020. The left, just because Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are the only ones who will be honest enough to call themselves socialists, the very Democrat platform, the Democrat Party's platform, is itself socialist. What Elizabeth Warren is proposing in her control over corporations and just taxing people because they have too much money, and it irritates her that they have too much money. These are people committed to the use of the government's power to redistribute wealth, a defining platform of socialism. The left is committed to socialism in varying degrees. The government's control over the healthcare system, your loss of your healthcare freedom, is a prime goal of the American left. So when I say these three elements are on the ballot in 2020, that is what it boils down to. And, so I said we're going to talk about the Civil War idea. We're not at a place of war. You have to be very careful with your use of words, but some things are worth fighting for. Some things in America are worth fighting for. Retaining freedom in America is worth fighting for. Retaining sovereignty, insisting on borders and enforceable laws and immigration laws is worth fighting for. Prosperity is worth fighting for. I'm going to tell you, if those folks in Venezuela could go back to the 1997 elections when they unwisely bought into arguments exactly like the Democrats are making today in America, if the Venezuelans could go back to 1997 and choose between the prosperity path they were on and the misery they are now in because of socialism, you wouldn't have a socialist Venezuela. But they do have it because they didn't recognize that the platform of the guy running on everything should be free was only going to cause misery and suffering and starvation. But that's where Venezuela is. That's where they are. That's what we have on our ballot in 2020 in America. We have those two options standing in front of us. So when the Democrat Party is trying to go after Trump, after President Trump, it's not just Trump. It is the idea of him standing for those three ideas and putting forth policies supporting those three ideas that makes the left crazy, because the left wants exactly the opposite of those three things. Freedom, sovereignty, prosperity are the Republican, the conservative, the Trump mission. The left's agenda is 180 degrees opposite of those three things. They want to take away your freedom. They want to abandon sovereignty. They want to inflict socialism, which will deprive us. It'll end all prosperity in America. The choice in 2020 is that stark.